The radio crackled with static at 3:47 hours, somewhere over the Kandahar province. Lieutenant Commander Vesper Blackbird Thorne had been flying combat missions for 8 years, but the voice coming through her headset carried a tremor she'd never heard before. Blackbird, this is Overlord. We have a situation developing 40 clicks northeast of your position. Proceed to grid coordinates 34.2847, 66.1234. Priority Alpha. The transmission cut to dead air, leaving only the steady hum of her F-16's engines and the whisper of wind across the canopy. Something was wrong. Priority Alpha meant imminent threat to American lives, but the coordinates placed her directly over disputed territory, a no-fly zone that had been marked off-limits for 3 months. Vesper's gloved fingers tightened around the stick as she banked northeast, her aircraft cutting through the pre-dawn darkness like a blade through silk. The landscape below was a patchwork of shadows and moonlight, ancient valleys carved by rivers that had run dry decades ago. Overlord Blackbird requesting clarification on mission parameters, she transmitted, her voice steady despite the knot forming in her stomach. No response. The radio had gone completely silent, not even the usual background chatter from other aircraft in the area. She was alone up here, 30,000 feet above Afghanistan, with orders that didn't make sense and communication that had mysteriously died. The heads-up display showed her fuel reserves, enough for 90 minutes of flight time. Whatever was happening at those coordinates, she'd have to handle it fast. Vesper had earned her call sign 3 years ago during a night mission over Syria, when she'd managed to stay invisible to enemy radar for 4 hours straight while providing close air support to a Special Forces team. The other pilots had started calling her Blackbird after that. Like the SR-71, she could slip through the darkness without being seen. But tonight felt different. The silence from command was unsettling, and the mission coordinates kept nagging at her. She'd flown over that area before, knew it was supposed to be empty except for scattered goat herders and the occasional Taliban scout. Now suddenly it was Priority Alpha. Her training told her to trust command, but her instincts were screaming that something was very, very wrong. The coordinates were still 15 minutes out when she first saw the orange glow on the horizon. Fire, a lot of it. And unless she was mistaken, those weren't campfires or burning vehicles. The flames were too bright, too concentrated, too uniform. They looked like something she'd only seen in classified briefings about chemical weapons facilities. Whatever was burning down there, it wasn't supposed to exist. Major Anders Koenig had been staring at the same radar screen for 6 hours, watching a single blip move steadily across the display. The coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he couldn't look away. The pilot designation read Blackbird, and according to the mission roster, she was supposed to be on a routine patrol along the Pakistani border. But her aircraft had been steadily moving northwest for the past 40 minutes, directly toward coordinates that officially didn't exist. "Sir, should I radio her back to patrol route?" Sergeant Martinez asked from the communications station. He was young, maybe 22, with the kind of eager efficiency that reminded Koenig of himself 15 years ago, before he'd learned that some missions weren't discussed in official reports. "Negative," Koenig replied, his voice carrying the weight of decisions he couldn't explain. "Let her fly." The radar screen showed Blackbird's position as a steady green dot against the dark background. She was flying alone, which was unusual for a Priority Alpha mission. Most operations of that classification required a minimum of 2 aircraft, often 4. But tonight, Lieutenant Commander Vesper Thorne was the only pilot in the air, heading toward a situation that didn't officially exist, carrying orders that hadn't been officially given. Koenig had been tracking Blackbird's career since her first deployment. She was good, better than good. Her precision bombing scores were in the top 5% of active pilots, and her situational awareness ratings were off the charts. But more importantly, she had something that couldn't be taught: the ability to make split-second decisions under pressure and live with the consequences. Tonight, she was going to need every bit of that skill. The communication blackout had been his idea. Standard operating procedure would have meant constant radio chatter, status updates every 5 minutes, detailed mission briefings. But this wasn't a standard operation. The less said over the radio, the better. If anyone was listening, and someone was always listening, they would hear only silence. The orange glow on the horizon was growing brighter as Blackbird approached the coordinates. Through her night vision system, Vesper could see the flames were coming from a compound of some kind, maybe a dozen buildings arranged in a rough square. The architecture was wrong for a Taliban stronghold, too organized, too permanent. These weren't the mud brick houses she'd seen in countless villages across Afghanistan. These were concrete structures built to last, built to hide something. Her targeting system automatically began cataloging potential threats as she circled the area at 20,000 feet. No surface-to-air missiles, no anti-aircraft guns, no sign of organized resistance. But there were vehicles moving around the compound, and heat signatures that suggested dozens of people on the ground. Some of them were running. The radio crackled to life suddenly, a voice she didn't recognize cutting through the static. "Blackbird, this is Phantom 6. Do you copy?" Vesper hesitated. Phantom 6 wasn't a call sign she knew, and it wasn't the voice from Overlord Command. But the transmission was coming through on the correct frequency with the proper encryption protocols. "Phantom 6, this is Blackbird. Copy." "Blackbird, be advised you are flying into a hot zone. Recommend you abort mission and return to base immediately." The voice was calm, professional, but there was something underneath it that made Vesper's combat instincts flare. She'd heard that tone before, the careful neutrality of someone who was being watched, someone who couldn't say what they really meant. Phantom 6, requesting clarification on nature of threat. "Blackbird, the threat is significant. I repeat, recommend immediate abort." Through her targeting system, she could see the people on the ground more clearly now. They weren't Taliban fighters. They were wearing uniforms, moving with military precision, and they were Americans. Down in the compound, Captain Miranda Cross pressed herself against the concrete wall as another burst of automatic gunfire stitched across the courtyard. Her team of 12 Special Forces operators had been inserted 6 hours ago to investigate reports of a chemical weapons facility. What they'd found instead was a nightmare that would haunt her for the rest of her life, however long that might be. "Scorpion 2, this is Scorpion 6, she whispered into her radio. "What's your status?" "Scorpion 6, we're pinned down in Building 3. Estimate 30 hostiles between us and the extraction point." Staff Sergeant Rico Delgado's voice was strained but steady. He'd been in situations like this before, but never with stakes this high. The facility had been exactly what the intelligence reports suggested, a sophisticated laboratory for producing chemical weapons. But it wasn't run by the Taliban or Al-Qaeda. The equipment was too advanced, too well-maintained. The security was too professional, and the men shooting at them now were wearing unmarked uniforms and carrying weapons that weren't available on the black market. Cross had been in the Army for 12 years, deployed to Iraq 3 times and Afghanistan twice. She'd seen enough covert operations to know when she was looking at something that wasn't supposed to exist. The chemical weapons facility was a joint operation between someone with serious resources and someone with serious connections, and her team had walked right into the middle of it. "Scorpion 6, this is Scorpion 4. The voice of Lieutenant Sarah Kim came through the radio, barely audible over the sound of gunfire. "I count at least 15 KIA on the hostile side, but they keep coming. We need immediate extraction." Cross looked up at the sky, hoping to see the lights of an approaching helicopter. Instead, she saw a single aircraft circling high above, its navigation lights barely visible against the stars. One plane, flying alone, in a no-fly zone that was supposed to be empty. Either it was their salvation or they were all about to die. The chemical weapons facility had been built into a natural depression in the mountains, surrounded by rocky outcroppings that provided perfect cover for defenders. Cross could see muzzle flashes from at least 6 different positions, and the sound of voices shouting orders in a language she didn't recognize. Russian, maybe, or Chinese. It didn't matter now. What mattered was getting her team out alive, and making sure the world knew what they'd found here. Lieutenant Commander Vesper Thorne had been flying combat missions for 8 years, but she'd never seen anything like the scene below. Through her targeting system, she could identify at least 2 distinct groups of fighters. One group was moving with the disciplined precision of professional soldiers, taking cover behind concrete barriers and advancing in coordinated fire teams. The other group was pinned down in defensive positions, returning fire but clearly outnumbered. The thermal imaging showed the heat signatures of bodies that weren't moving, a lot of them. Whatever was happening down there, it had been going on for hours, and people were dying. "Phantom 6, this is Blackbird," she transmitted. "I have visual on the target area, requesting permission to provide close air support." The response came immediately. "Blackbird negative. You are not authorized to engage. Repeat, you are not authorized to engage." Vesper's jaw tightened. She could see American soldiers trapped in a firefight, and she was being ordered to do nothing. The rules of engagement were clear. She had the authority to provide close air support to friendly forces under fire, regardless of specific authorization from command. But Phantom 6 wasn't her commanding officer, and the mission parameters had been vague from the beginning. The radio crackled again, a different voice this time. "Blackbird, this is Scorpion 6. Are you the angel in the sky?" The transmission was weak, probably from a handheld radio, but the desperation in the voice was unmistakable. Vesper made a decision that would define the rest of her career. "Scorpion 6, this is Blackbird, I copy. What's your situation?" "Blackbird, we are 12 Special Forces operators trapped in a chemical weapons facility. We have multiple wounded and are running low on ammunition. We need immediate close air support and extraction." Chemical weapons facility. The words hit Vesper like a physical blow. Chemical weapons were weapons of mass destruction, banned by international treaty. If American soldiers had discovered such a facility, it would be front-page news around the world. Unless, of course, the facility wasn't supposed to exist. "Scorpion 6, this is Blackbird. I understand your situation. Stand by for immediate support." She banked her aircraft into an attack run, her fingers dancing across the weapons system's controls. The F-16 was loaded with a standard air-to-ground package: 2 AGM-65 Maverick missiles, 4 GBU-12 laser-guided bombs, and 511 rounds of 20 ammunition for the internal M61 Vulcan cannon. More than enough firepower to change the balance of the fight below. But as she lined up her first attack run, a new voice came through the radio. This one was different from the others, older, with the authority of someone who was used to being obeyed. "Blackbird, this is General Morrison. You are ordered to abort your attack run immediately and return to base." Vesper's blood ran cold. General Morrison was her commanding officer, a man she'd served under for 3 years. If he was giving her direct orders to abort, there had to be a reason. But below her, American soldiers were dying, and she was the only one who could help them. Major Anders Koenig watched the radar screen with growing dread as Blackbird's aircraft began its attack run. The green dot was moving fast, descending toward the coordinates that officially didn't exist. In 30 seconds, Lieutenant Commander Vesper Thorne would either save 12 American lives or start a war that would reshape the Middle East. "Sir, should I patch you through to Blackbird?" Sergeant Martinez asked. Koenig shook his head. "No, let her fly." The communication traffic had been monitored from the beginning. Every transmission between Blackbird and the ground team, every order from Phantom 6, every plea for help from Scorpion 6. The operation was being watched by people with more authority than a major in the Air Force, people who made decisions that affected the lives of thousands. But sometimes, Koenig reflected, The most important decisions were made by individual soldiers who chose to do what was right rather than what was ordered. Lieutenant Commander Vesper Thorne was about to become one of those soldiers. The radar screen showed Blackbird's position as she entered her attack run. In 15 seconds, she would be in range to fire her missiles. In 30 seconds, the balance of the fight on the ground would shift decisively, and in 45 seconds, the world would change. Koenig had been in the Air Force for 22 years, had coordinated air support for dozens of ground operations, had watched thousands of hours of combat footage. But he'd never seen anything like this. A single pilot, flying alone, about to engage an enemy that wasn't supposed to exist, to save soldiers who were supposed to be dead. The green dot on the radar screen was moving steadily toward the target coordinates. In a few minutes, it would all be over. Captain Miranda Cross pressed herself against the concrete wall as another burst of automatic gunfire raked the courtyard. Her team had been pinned down for 6 hours now, and ammunition was running critically low. Staff Sergeant Delgado had 3 rounds left in his magazine. Lieutenant Kim was down to her sidearm. The radio operator had been killed 2 hours ago, taking their primary communication equipment with him. But somehow, they'd made contact with the aircraft circling overhead. And for the first time since the mission began, Cross felt a flicker of hope. Scorpion 6, this is Blackbird. I'm beginning my attack run. Mark your positions with IR strobes and take cover. Cross pulled an infrared strobe from her equipment vest and activated it. The device would be invisible to the naked eye but would show up clearly on the pilot's night vision system. Around the compound, she could see the faint flicker of other strobes as her team members marked their positions. The sound of the approaching aircraft was growing louder now, a steady roar that cut through the noise of the firefight. Cross had heard that sound before in Iraq and Afghanistan, and it always meant the same thing. Salvation was coming from the sky. She looked up and saw the navigation lights of an F-16 Fighting Falcon as it banked into its attack run. The aircraft was flying low and fast, its pilot clearly skilled and experienced. Whoever was up there, they knew what they were doing. Scorpion 6, this is Blackbird. Identify target buildings for immediate engagement. Cross keyed her radio. Blackbird, hostile positions in buildings 1, 4, and 7. Friendlies are in buildings 2, 3, and 5. We are marked with IR strobes. Copy Scorpion 6. Engaging hostile positions now. The first AGM-65 Maverick missile streaked down from the sky like a falling star. Its infrared seeker locked onto the heat signature of the largest group of enemy fighters. The building erupted in a fireball that lit up the night sky, sending concrete and debris flying in all directions. The sound of the explosion echoed off the mountains, followed by the screams of wounded men. Cross felt the ground shake beneath her feet as the second missile found its target. Building 4 disappeared in a cloud of dust and smoke, taking with it at least 8 enemy fighters who had been firing from the windows. The sound of return fire was noticeably diminished now. The pilot's attack had been precise and devastating, eliminating the largest concentration of enemy forces while leaving the buildings containing friendly troops untouched. It was the kind of precision flying that required years of training and nerves of steel. Scorpion 6, this is Blackbird. I'm coming around for a second pass with cannon fire. Keep your heads down. Lieutenant Commander Vesper Thorne felt the familiar rush of adrenaline as she banked her aircraft around for another attack run. The first missile strikes had been successful, eliminating 2 of the 3 main enemy positions. But thermal imaging showed that hostile forces were still active in the compound, and the Special Forces team was still pinned down. The F-16's heads-up display showed her airspeed, altitude, and targeting information as she lined up for a cannon run. The M61 Vulcan was a devastating weapon, capable of firing 6,000 rounds per minute of 20 ammunition. In the hands of a skilled pilot, It could eliminate individual targets with surgical precision. She could see the IR strobes marking friendly positions as she approached the target area. The Special Forces team had done a good job of marking their locations, giving her clear lanes of fire between their positions and the remaining enemy forces. Blackbird, this is Scorpion 6. We have movement in Building 7, multiple hostiles with RPGs. Vesper adjusted her aim slightly, centering the targeting reticle on the building in question. Through the night vision system, she could see the heat signatures of men moving inside the structure, at least 6 of them. If they had rocket-propelled grenades, they posed a serious threat to the ground team. She squeezed the trigger, and the Vulcan cannon roared to life. The 20 rounds tore through the concrete walls of Building 7 like paper, the depleted uranium cores designed to penetrate armor and destroy anything behind it. The building shuddered under the impact, and the heat signatures inside went still. Scorpion 6, this is Blackbird. Building 7 is neutralized. What's your status? Blackbird, hostile fire has decreased significantly. We're preparing to move to the extraction point. Vesper pulled up from her attack run and began circling the area again, scanning for any remaining threats. The thermal imaging showed scattered heat signatures around the compound, but they were no longer moving in organized groups. The enemy's command structure had been broken. But as she completed her circle, a new threat appeared on her radar warning receiver. Surface-to-air missiles incoming from the north, 2 of them moving fast. Scorpion 6, this is Blackbird. I have SAMs inbound from the north, taking evasive action. The first missile streaked past her aircraft, its proximity fuse failing to detonate. But the second one was tracking true, its infrared seeker locked onto the heat signature of her engines. Vesper threw the F-16 into a violent diving turn, releasing chaff and flares to confuse the missile's guidance system. The missile detonated 50 meters behind her aircraft, close enough to rattle the airframe but not close enough to cause serious damage. But the message was clear. Someone with serious military hardware was trying to shoot her down. Major Anders Koenig watched the radar screen with growing alarm as multiple new contacts appeared from the north. Aircraft, flying in formation, heading directly toward Blackbird's position. The identification friend or foe system showed them as unknown, which meant they weren't American, British, or any other NATO forces. Sir, I'm reading 4 aircraft inbound from the north, Sergeant Martinez reported. They're not squawking friendly codes. Koenig felt his stomach drop. 4 aircraft, probably fighters, heading toward a lone F-16 that was providing close air support to a Special Forces team. The mathematics were simple and brutal. Blackbird was about to be outnumbered 4-1. Sergeant, patch me through to Blackbird immediately. Yes, sir. Martinez's fingers flew across the communication controls. Blackbird, this is Overlord. You have 4 bogies inbound from the north. Estimate 5 minutes to intercept. Recommend immediate egress. The response came immediately. Overlord, this is Blackbird. Negative on egress. I have friendlies on the ground who need support. Koenig admired her courage, but courage wouldn't stop air-to-air missiles. Blackbird, you're outnumbered 4-1. The ground team will have to find another way out. Overlord, these are American soldiers. I'm not leaving them. The radar screen showed the 4 unknown aircraft continuing their approach. In 4 minutes, they would be in missile range. In 5 minutes, Lieutenant Commander Vesper Thorne would either be dead or running for her life. But Koenig knew her well enough to know that she wouldn't run. She'd stay and fight, even if it meant dying. It was the kind of decision that made the difference between a good pilot and a great one. And it was the kind of decision that would probably get her killed. Captain Miranda Cross could hear the sound of jet engines overhead as she led her team toward the extraction point. The pilot Blackbird had cleared the way, eliminating the main enemy positions and giving them a chance to escape. but they weren't clear yet. Scorpion 2, this is Scorpion 6. What's your status? Scorpion 6, we're moving. Estimate 2 minutes to extraction point. Staff Sergeant Delgado's voice was steady, but she could hear the exhaustion underneath. They'd been fighting for 6 hours, and everyone was running on adrenaline and determination. The extraction point was a clearing about half a mile from the compound, where a helicopter was supposed to pick them up. But there was no helicopter on the way. The mission had been compromised from the beginning, and they were on their own. Scorpion 6, this is Blackbird. I have multiple aircraft inbound from the north. They're not friendly. I'm going to try to hold them off, but you need to move fast. Cross felt her heart sink. The pilot who had saved them was now facing her own battle, and the odds weren't good. Blackbird, how many aircraft? Scorpion 6, I count 4 bogies. They'll be here in 3 minutes. 4 against 1. Even with superior training and equipment, those weren't odds that anyone wanted to face. But Blackbird was staying to fight, buying them time to escape. Scorpion 6, this is Scorpion 4. Lieutenant Kim's voice came through the radio. I have eyes on the extraction point. No sign of pickup, but the area is clear. Cross made a decision that would haunt her for years. All Scorpion elements, this is Scorpion 6. We're going to ground. Find defensive positions and wait for extraction. Blackbird is buying us time, and we're not going to waste it. The team took cover in a rocky outcropping that provided good fields of fire and protection from air attack. They had maybe 20 minutes of ammunition left between them, but they were alive, and they were free. Thanks to a pilot they'd never met, flying alone against impossible odds. Cross looked up at the sky, where the lights of Blackbird's aircraft were visible among the stars. In a few minutes, that brave pilot would be fighting for her life, and there was nothing they could do to help. Lieutenant Commander Vesper Thorne checked her weapons systems as the 4 enemy aircraft approached. She had 2 AIM-9 Sidewinder air-to-air missiles, 2 AIM-120 AMRAAM missiles, and whatever cannon ammunition was left after the ground attack. Against 4 aircraft, it would have to be enough. The radar warning receiver was painting the 4 aircraft as MiG-29 Fulcrums, Russian-built fighters that were fast and maneuverable. They were flying in a standard intercept formation, 2 aircraft high and 2 aircraft low, designed to prevent her from escaping. Blackbird, this is Falcon Leader. You are ordered to leave the area immediately, or you will be shot down. The voice was heavily accented, probably Russian or Eastern European. Vesper keyed her radio. Falcon Leader, this is Blackbird. I am conducting operations in international airspace. You are ordered to withdraw. Blackbird, this is your final warning. Leave now or face the consequences. Vesper armed her weapons systems and selected the first AIM-120 AMRAAM. The advanced air-to-air missile had a range of over 60 miles and could engage multiple targets simultaneously. Against 4 aircraft, she would need every advantage. Falcon Leader, this is Blackbird. I'm not going anywhere. The first missile launch came from the aircraft flying high and to the left, an infrared-guided weapon that streaked toward her position like a comet. Vesper broke hard right, releasing chaff and flares while diving toward the mountains below. The missile detonated harmlessly behind her, but 3 more were already in the air. She fired her first AMRAAM at the lead aircraft, watching on radar as the missile tracked toward its target. The MiG-29 tried to evade, but the AMRAAM was too fast and too smart. It detonated in a fireball that lit up the night sky, sending debris spinning toward the ground. 3 aircraft left, still not good odds but better than 4. The second wave of missiles came from 2 directions simultaneously, forcing Vesper to choose which threat to evade. She chose the one from the right, pulling the F-16 into a vertical climb that pushed her body against the ejection seat with crushing force. The missile passed beneath her aircraft and detonated against the mountainside. But the second missile found its mark. The warhead exploded just behind the F-16's port wing, sending shrapnel through the aircraft's control surfaces and hydraulic systems. Warning lights flashed across the cockpit displays as multiple systems failed simultaneously. The aircraft was still flying, but barely. Vesper fought to maintain control as the F-16 began to spiral toward the ground. The stick felt loose in her hands, the aircraft responding sluggishly to her commands. Blackbird, this is Overlord. What's your status? Overlord, this is Blackbird. I'm hit and going down. Repeat, I'm going down. Major Anders Koenig watched the radar screen as Blackbird's aircraft began to descend rapidly toward the mountains below. The green dot that had been moving steadily across the display was now spinning erratically, losing altitude at an alarming rate. "Sergeant, get me a search and rescue team immediately," he ordered, "and contact the ground team. They need to know that Blackbird is down." "Yes, sir." Martinez's voice was tight with tension. "Sir, the bogies are still in the area. They're circling Blackbird's crash site." Koenig felt a cold rage building in his chest. The enemy aircraft had shot down an American pilot who was trying to save American soldiers. Now they were circling the crash site like vultures, probably planning to finish the job. "Sergeant, patch me through to General Morrison immediately." "Sir, General Morrison is in a classified briefing. He's not available." "Then get me someone who is available. We have an American pilot down in enemy territory, and I need authorization to mount a rescue operation." The radar screen showed the 3 remaining enemy aircraft continuing to circle the crash site. They were taking their time, probably waiting to see if Blackbird had survived the crash. If she had, they would finish her off. But Koenig knew Vesper Thorn well enough to know that she wouldn't give up easily. She was one of the best pilots in the Air Force, and she'd been in tight spots before. If anyone could survive a crash in enemy territory, it was her. The question was whether he could get to her in time. Lieutenant Commander Vesper Thorn regained consciousness, hanging upside down in her ejection seat, suspended by her parachute cords from a tree branch 20 feet off the ground. The F-16 had crashed somewhere nearby, sending up a pillar of black smoke that would be visible for miles. She could hear the sound of jet engines overhead as the enemy aircraft circled the crash site. They were looking for her, and they wouldn't give up easily. She had to get out of the parachute and find cover before they spotted her. The quick-release mechanism on her harness was jammed, probably damaged during the ejection. She pulled a knife from her survival kit and began cutting through the parachute cords, working as quickly as possible while hanging upside down. The knife was sharp, but the cords were strong. It took several minutes of careful cutting before she was able to free herself, dropping to the ground with a bone-jarring impact that left her gasping for breath. She was alive, but barely. The ejection had left her with a dislocated shoulder, several cracked ribs, and a concussion that made the world spin whenever she moved too quickly. But she was alive and she was free. The survival kit contained a radio, water, medical supplies, and a sidearm. The radio was damaged, probably from the ejection, but it might still work. She extended the antenna and tried to make contact with the ground team. "Scorpion 6, this is Blackbird. Do you copy?" The response came immediately. "Blackbird, this is Scorpion 6. We copy. What's your status?" "Scorpion 6, I'm on the ground about 2 miles north of your position. I'm mobile but injured. Enemy aircraft are circling the crash site." "Blackbird, we're moving to your position. Can you find cover?" Vesper looked around and saw a rocky outcropping that would provide protection from air attack. "Scorpion 6, I'm moving to cover now, but the enemy aircraft are still in the area." "Blackbird, we understand. We're coming to get you." For the first time since the mission began, Vesper felt a flicker of hope. The Special Forces team was coming for her, just as she had come for them. In a few minutes, they would either escape together or die together. But first, she had to stay alive long enough for them to reach her. Captain Miranda Cross led her team through the rocky terrain toward Blackbird's position, moving as quickly as possible while staying in cover. The pilot who had saved them was now trapped on the ground, injured and surrounded by enemies. It was their turn to return the favor. Scorpion 2, this is Scorpion 6. What's your status? Scorpion 6, we're moving. Estimate 10 minutes to Blackbird's position. Staff Sergeant Delgado's voice was steady, but she could hear the strain underneath. They'd been fighting for 7 hours now, and everyone was exhausted. The sound of jet engines overhead was constant now, the enemy aircraft circling the area like predators. They were looking for the downed pilot, and they wouldn't give up easily. Scorpion 6, this is Scorpion 4. Lieutenant Kim's voice came through the radio. I have eyes on the crash site. The aircraft is completely destroyed, but I don't see any sign of the pilot. Cross felt a moment of relief. If the pilot wasn't at the crash site, it meant she'd survived the ejection and was mobile. But it also meant she was somewhere out there, alone and injured, with enemy forces closing in. Scorpion 4, continue to Blackbird's last known position. We'll find her. The terrain was rough and rocky, perfect for hiding but terrible for moving quickly. Cross could see the smoke from the crashed aircraft rising in the distance, a black pillar against the pre-dawn sky. The enemy aircraft were circling that area, but they were also expanding their search pattern. Scorpion 6, this is Blackbird. The pilot's voice was weak but clear. I'm in a rocky area about 1.5 miles north of the crash site. I can see 3 aircraft circling, but they haven't spotted me yet. Blackbird, we're moving to your position. Can you provide better coordinates? Scorpion 6, I'm at the base of a large rock formation that looks like a sleeping giant. It's the highest point in the immediate area. Cross knew the formation the pilot was describing. It was about 15 minutes away at their current pace, assuming they didn't run into any enemy ground forces. But the enemy aircraft were expanding their search pattern, and it was only a matter of time before they spotted the downed pilot. Blackbird, we're coming, hold on. Lieutenant Commander Vesper Thorne pressed herself against the rocky wall as another aircraft passed overhead, its engines roaring in the pre-dawn darkness. Her shoulder was throbbing, and every breath sent sharp pains through her ribs. But she was alive, and the Special Forces team was coming for her. The radio crackled with static. Blackbird, this is Scorpion 6. We're 5 minutes out. Can you see any ground forces in your area? Vesper scanned the terrain around her position. The rocky outcropping provided good cover, but it also limited her visibility. She could see the smoke from her crashed aircraft in the distance, and the lights of the circling enemy aircraft, but no sign of ground forces. Scorpion 6, negative on ground forces, but the aircraft are expanding their search pattern. They're getting closer. Blackbird, we understand. We're moving as fast as we can. The sound of rotors in the distance made Vesper's heart leap. Helicopters coming from the south. But as they got closer, she realized they weren't American aircraft. The sound was wrong, and they were coming from the wrong direction. Scorpion 6, this is Blackbird. I have helicopters inbound from the south. They're not friendly. Blackbird, how many helicopters? Scorpion 6, I count 3. No, 4 helicopters. They're heading toward the crash site. The helicopters were moving fast, probably carrying troops to secure the crash site and search for survivors. In a few minutes, the area would be swarming with enemy soldiers. Scorpion 6, this is Blackbird. The helicopters are landing near the crash site. I can see troops deploying. Blackbird, we're 3 minutes out. Hold your position. Vesper checked her sidearm and made sure she had a full magazine. The Beretta M9 held 15 rounds, plus 1 in the chamber. Against a company of enemy soldiers, it wouldn't be much, but it was better than nothing. The sound of voices in the distance made her blood run cold. Men shouting orders in a foreign language, moving closer to her position. The enemy troops were spreading out from the crash site, conducting a systematic search of the area. In a few minutes, they would find her. Captain Miranda Cross could see the enemy helicopters in the distance as she led her team up the rocky slope toward Blackbird's position. 4 aircraft had landed near the crash site, and she could see the tiny figures of soldiers spreading out in search formation. They had maybe 10 minutes before the enemy troops reached the pilot's hiding spot. Scorpion 2, this is Scorpion 6. We need to move faster. Scorpion 6, we're pushing as hard as we can. Staff Sergeant Delgado's breathing was labored. They'd been running for 20 minutes through terrain that would challenge a mountain goat, and everyone was reaching their limits. The rock formation known as the Sleeping Giant loomed ahead, its weathered surface rising nearly 200 feet into the air. Somewhere at its base, an injured pilot was waiting for rescue, surrounded by enemies who would kill her without hesitation. Scorpion 6, this is Blackbird. The pilot's voice was barely a whisper. I can hear voices, they're close. Blackbird, we're 2 minutes out. Can you see us? Scorpion 6, negative. I'm staying in cover. Cross could see the logic in the pilot's decision. Moving would expose her to the enemy search teams, but staying put meant she was trapped. It was a calculated risk, and Cross hoped it was the right one. Scorpion 4, this is Scorpion 6. I need you to take point. Find the pilot and establish a defensive perimeter. Scorpion 6, this is Scorpion 4. Copy. Lieutenant Kim moved ahead of the main group, her weapon ready and her eyes scanning the rocky terrain for any sign of the downed pilot. The Sleeping Giant formation was riddled with caves and crevices, perfect hiding spots, but also perfect places for an ambush. The sound of voices was getting closer now, the enemy soldiers communicating in short, professional bursts. They were good, Cross realized. These weren't Taliban fighters or local militiamen. These were professional soldiers, probably special forces, trained for exactly this kind of operation. Scorpion 6, this is Scorpion 4. I have eyes on Blackbird. She's in a cave about 30 meters ahead. Cross felt a surge of relief. They'd found the pilot, and she was still alive. Now they just had to get out of there before the enemy soldiers found them. Lieutenant Commander Vesper Thorne heard the whispered call sign before she saw the figure approaching her hiding spot. Blackbird, this is Scorpion 4. I'm coming to you. The soldier who emerged from the shadows was young, maybe 25, with the lean build and alert eyes of someone who'd spent years in combat. She moved with the fluid grace of a predator, her weapon ready but not threatening. Ma'am, I'm Lieutenant Kim. We're here to get you out. Vesper tried to stand and immediately regretted it. The pain in her ribs was excruciating, and her dislocated shoulder felt like it was on fire. I'm not sure I can move very fast. We'll manage, ma'am. Can you walk? I think so. Vesper tested her legs and found they were still functional despite the pain. Where's the rest of your team? Setting up a defensive perimeter. We've got enemy soldiers about 5 minutes behind us and more coming from the helicopters. The sound of voices was definitely closer now, and Vesper could hear the crackle of radio communications. The enemy search teams were closing in, and time was running out. Lieutenant, how many men do you have? 12, ma'am, but we're low on ammunition and everyone's exhausted. 12 soldiers against what looked like a company of enemy troops. The mathematics weren't encouraging, but Vesper had learned long ago that wars weren't won by mathematics alone. They were won by courage, determination, and the willingness to fight against impossible odds. What's the plan? She asked. We're going to move to a secondary extraction point about 2 miles from here. It's rough terrain, but it should slow down the pursuit. Vesper nodded, trying to ignore the pain in her ribs. Let's go. Lieutenant Kim helped her to her feet, and together they moved toward the mouth of the cave. Outside, the pre-dawn darkness was beginning to give way to the first faint light of dawn. In a few hours, the sun would be up, and their chances of escape would drop dramatically. Scorpion 6, this is Scorpion 4. I have Blackbird. We're moving to your position. Scorpion 4, this is Scorpion 6. Copy, we're ready to move. The journey to the main group took less than 5 minutes, but it felt like hours. Every step sent jolts of pain through Vesper's injured body, and she could hear the enemy soldiers getting closer with each passing minute. Captain Cross was waiting with the rest of the team, her expression grim but determined. Blackbird, I'm Captain Cross. We're going to get you out of here. Captain, I appreciate what you're doing, but you don't have to risk your lives for me. Ma'am, you risked your life for us. Now it's our turn. The simple statement carried more weight than any speech about duty or honor. These soldiers understood the bonds that held military units together, the unspoken promise that no one would be left behind. What's the plan? Vesper asked. We're going to move to a secondary extraction point. It's about 2 miles through rough terrain, but it should give us some breathing room. Vesper looked around at the tired faces of the Special Forces team. They'd been fighting for 8 hours, were low on ammunition, and were about to embark on a difficult journey through hostile territory. But their eyes showed no doubt, no hesitation. They were professionals, and they would do whatever it took to complete the mission. Let's move, she said. The rocky terrain around the sleeping giant formation was treacherous in the best of circumstances, but in the pre-dawn darkness, with injured team members and pursuing enemies, it was potentially deadly. Captain Cross led the way, followed by Vesper and Lieutenant Kim, with the rest of the team spread out in a defensive formation. The sound of voices behind them was constant now, the enemy soldiers moving through the same terrain, but with the advantage of numbers and fresh legs. They were gaining ground, and everyone knew it. Scorpion 6, this is Scorpion 2. Staff Sergeant Delgado's voice was tight with strain. I can see lights behind us. They're about 10 minutes back. Scorpion 2, this is Scorpion 6. Copy, keep moving. The secondary extraction point was a narrow valley between 2 mountain ridges, accessible only through a single pass that could be defended by a small force. It was the kind of terrain that favored the defender, but only if they could reach it before the enemy caught up. Vesper's injured shoulder was making it difficult to maintain her balance on the rocky slope. Every stumble sent waves of pain through her body, but she gritted her teeth and kept moving. The Special Forces team had risked everything to save her, and she wouldn't let them down. Blackbird, how are you holding up? Lieutenant Kim asked. I'm fine, Vesper lied. In reality, she was barely conscious, running on adrenaline and determination. But the last thing these soldiers needed was to worry about her. The lights behind them were getting brighter now, and she could hear the sound of dogs barking. The enemy had brought tracking dogs, which meant they could follow the team's scent even in the darkness. Captain, they have dogs, she said. Cross nodded grimly. I know, we'll deal with it when we get to the valley. The valley was still a mile away, and the enemy was closing fast. In a few minutes, they would be in small arms range, and the real fight would begin. Major Anders Koenig stared at the radar screen as the rescue helicopter approached the secondary extraction point. The aircraft was flying low and fast, using the terrain to mask its approach from enemy radar. But the pilot would only have one chance to pick up the ground team before enemy forces overran the position. Rescue 1, this is Overlord. Be advised, you have multiple hostiles converging on the extraction point. Estimate 20 minutes before they arrive. Overlord, this is Rescue 1. Copy. We're inbound ETA 15 minutes. The mathematics were close but achievable. If the ground team could hold their position for 15 minutes, they could be extracted before the enemy arrived in force. But if the enemy moved faster than expected, or if the helicopter was delayed, the entire team would be captured or killed. Sergeant, patch me through to Scorpion 6. Yes, sir. Martinez's fingers flew across the communication controls. Scorpion 6, this is Overlord. Rescue 1 is inbound, ETA 15 minutes to your position. The response came immediately. Overlord, this is Scorpion 6. Copy. We're moving to the extraction point now. Koenig could hear the strain in Captain Cross's voice. The team had been fighting for 9 hours, was low on ammunition, and was carrying a wounded pilot through hostile territory. But they were still moving, still fighting, still refusing to give up. Scorpion 6, this is Overlord. Be advised, you have multiple hostiles pursuing your position. Estimate 20 minutes before they reach the extraction point. Overlord, this is Scorpion 6. We'll be ready. The radar screen showed the rescue helicopter continuing its approach, while multiple ground contacts converged on the extraction point from different directions. In 20 minutes, it would either be a successful rescue or a massacre. Captain Miranda Cross could see the narrow valley ahead as she led her team down the rocky slope. The terrain was perfect for a defensive stand. High ground on both sides, limited approaches, and good fields of fire. If they could reach the valley before the enemy caught up, they might have a chance. Scorpion 2, this is Scorpion 6. What's your status? Scorpion 6, we're moving. I can see the valley entrance about 500 meters ahead. The sound of gunfire behind them made everyone freeze. Single shots, probably from sniper rifles, followed by the distinctive crack of rounds passing overhead. The enemy had made visual contact and was trying to slow them down. Scorpion 6, this is Scorpion 4. I'm taking fire from the ridge line. Scorpion 4, this is Scorpion 6. Keep moving. Don't return fire unless you have a clear shot. The team's ammunition was too limited to waste on suppressive fire. Every round would have to count when they reached the valley and made their stand. Vesper stumbled on a loose rock and nearly fell, but Lieutenant Kim caught her arm and steadied her. The pain in her ribs was becoming unbearable, and she could feel blood seeping through her flight suit from cuts caused by the ejection. "Ma'am, we're almost there," Kim said. "I know, keep moving." The valley entrance was a narrow gap between two towering rock faces, barely wide enough for two people to walk side by side. It was the perfect choke point, forcing any attacking force to approach in single file. But it also meant there was no escape route if the defense failed. Scorpion 6, this is Overlord. Rescue 1 is 10 minutes out. Overlord, this is Scorpion 6. Copy. We're entering the valley now. Cross led the team through the narrow entrance and into the valley beyond. The terrain opened up slightly, providing enough space for the helicopter to land, but still offering good defensive positions on the surrounding ridges. All Scorpion elements, this is Scorpion 6. Set up defensive positions on the north and south ridges. We hold here until extraction. The team scattered to their assigned positions, taking cover behind rocks and boulders that would provide protection from small arms fire. They had maybe 3 magazines of ammunition per person, plus whatever was in their sidearms. Against a company of enemy soldiers, it would have to be enough. Lieutenant Commander Vesper Thorne found a position behind a large boulder that gave her a clear view of the valley entrance. Her sidearm was loaded and ready, but she knew that in her current condition, she wouldn't be much help in a firefight. "Blackbird, how many rounds do you have?" Captain Cross asked. 16 rounds, 9mm, Vesper replied. "Save them for close range. We'll handle the long-distance work." The sound of voices echoing off the rock walls announced the arrival of the enemy search teams. They were moving cautiously, probably aware that the valley was a natural ambush site. But they were also persistent, and they had the advantage of numbers. Scorpion 6, this is Scorpion 2. I have eyes on the entrance. Count 15 hostiles approaching. Scorpion 2, this is Scorpion 6. Hold your fire until they're in the killing zone. The enemy soldiers appeared at the valley entrance, moving in a standard tactical formation. They were professionals, Cross realized, probably Russian or Chinese special forces. They knew what they were doing, and they wouldn't be easy to stop. Scorpion 6, this is Overlord. Rescue 1 is 5 minutes out. 5 minutes. They had to hold their position for 5 more minutes, and then they would be safe. But the enemy soldiers were already moving into the valley, and more were coming behind them. All Scorpion element, this is Scorpion 6. Open fire. The valley erupted in gunfire as the Special Forces team opened up on the advancing enemy soldiers. The confined space amplified the sound, turning the firefight into a deafening cacophony of muzzle flashes and ricocheting bullets. Vesper watched as the enemy soldiers took cover behind whatever protection they could find. They were good, she realized. They moved with the precision of professionals, and they were adapting quickly to the situation. But the Special Forces team was better. Their positioning was perfect, their fields of fire overlapping, and their accuracy was devastating. Within 30 seconds, half the enemy force was down. Scorpion 6, this is Scorpion 2. I count 8 hostiles down, but more are coming through the entrance. Scorpion 2, this is Scorpion 6. Keep firing. The battle continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The enemy soldiers kept coming, wave after wave of them, but the valley's narrow entrance limited their ability to bring superior numbers to bear. Scorpion 6, this is Overlord. Rescue 1 is inbound, ETA 2 minutes. 2 minutes? They just had to hold for 2 more minutes. The sound of rotor blades echoing off the valley walls was the most beautiful sound Vesper had ever heard. The rescue helicopter was coming in fast and low, its pilot skilled enough to navigate the treacherous terrain while under fire. Rescue 1, this is Scorpion 6. LZ is clear, but we're taking fire from the entrance. Scorpion 6, this is Rescue 1. Copy, we're coming in hot. The helicopter appeared over the southern ridge, its door gunners already firing at the enemy positions. The aircraft settled into the valley with practiced precision, its rotors whipping up clouds of dust and debris. All Scorpion elements, this is Scorpion 6, fall back to the helicopter. Move, move, move. The team began a fighting withdrawal toward the helicopter, laying down suppressive fire while moving in bounds. Vesper tried to run but stumbled, her injured body finally giving out. Lieutenant Kim was there immediately, helping her to her feet and half carrying her toward the aircraft. Come on, ma'am, we're almost there. The helicopter's door gunners were pouring fire into the valley entrance, keeping the enemy soldiers pinned down while the team boarded. One by one, the Special Forces operators dove through the aircraft's open doors, their weapons still firing. Vesper was the last to board, helped into the helicopter by willing hands just as the enemy soldiers broke through the defensive line. The aircraft lifted off immediately, its pilot pushing the engines to their limits as they climbed out of the valley. Rescue 1, this is Scorpion 6. All personnel accounted for, we're clear. Scorpion 6, this is Rescue 1. Copy, welcome aboard. Lieutenant Commander Vesper Thorne looked out the helicopter's window as the valley fell away beneath them. The sun was rising over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. She was alive, and she was free, thanks to 12 soldiers who had refused to leave her behind. Thank you, she said to Captain Cross, who was sitting across from her in the crowded aircraft. Thank you, ma'am, for everything. The helicopter flew south toward the safety of friendly territory, carrying 13 American soldiers who had survived a night that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. But they had survived, and they had done it together. In the distance, the smoke from the chemical weapons facility was still rising into the morning sky, a black pillar that would be visible for miles. Whatever secrets had been hidden in that compound were now exposed, and the world would have to deal with the consequences. But for now, 13 soldiers were going home. Major Anders Koenig watched the radar screen as the rescue helicopter crossed into friendly airspace. The green dot representing Rescue 1 was moving steadily south, carrying its precious cargo to safety. The mission was over, and everyone was alive. "Sergeant, signal the rescue helicopter that they're cleared for landing at Bagram." "Yes, sir." Martinez's voice was filled with relief. "Sir, should I contact General Morrison?" Koenig considered the question. General Morrison would want a full briefing on the night's events, but that could wait. For now, the important thing was getting the ground team and the downed pilot to safety. "Contact the general and tell him that the mission is complete. All personnel are accounted for, and we're bringing them home." "Yes, sir." The radar screen showed the rescue helicopter continuing its journey south, while the enemy aircraft that had been circling the crash site were returning to their base. The immediate crisis was over, but Koenig knew that the real consequences were just beginning. The chemical weapons facility would be front-page news within hours. There would be congressional hearings, diplomatic protests, and military investigations. The truth about what had happened in that remote valley would eventually come out, and when it did, it would change everything. But Lieutenant Commander Vesper Thorne and the 12 members of the Special Forces team had done their job. They had discovered a threat to national security, fought against overwhelming odds, and brought each other home alive. In the end, that was what mattered most. The green dot on the radar screen continued its journey south, carrying 13 heroes toward safety. The helicopter touched down at Bagram Air Base just as the sun was reaching its zenith. Medical personnel were waiting on the tarmac, ready to treat the wounded and exhausted soldiers who had survived the night's ordeal. Lieutenant Commander Vesper Thorne was the first to be taken to the medical facility, her injuries requiring immediate attention. But even as the medics worked on her dislocated shoulder and cracked ribs, her mind was focused on the events of the past 12 hours. The chemical weapons facility, the mysterious enemy forces, the orders that had come from nowhere and led to everything. "Ma'am, you need to rest," the medic said as he finished wrapping her ribs. "You've been through a lot." "I need to debrief," Vesper replied. "There are things that need to be reported." "Ma'am, the debriefing can wait. You need medical attention." But Vesper knew that some things couldn't wait. The facility they had discovered was evidence of a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government. The enemy forces that had attacked them were professional soldiers, not terrorists or insurgents, and the orders that had sent her to those coordinates had come from someone who knew exactly what they would find there. "I need to speak to Major Koenig," she said. "Ma'am, Major Koenig is in meetings. He's not available." "Then get me someone who is available. This is a matter of national security." The medic looked uncomfortable, but he nodded. "I'll see what I can do, ma'am." As the medical team continued their work, Vesper's mind raced through the implications of what she had seen. The chemical weapons facility had been too sophisticated, too well defended, to be a simple terrorist operation. It had been a joint venture between multiple organizations, possibly including elements of the American government. And now 13 soldiers knew the truth. Captain Miranda Cross sat in the debriefing room at Bagram Air Base, facing a panel of officers who had been asking the same questions for the past 3 hours. The men across from her wore the insignia of various intelligence agencies, and their questions were pointed and precise. "Captain, tell us again about the facility you discovered," said a man in civilian clothes who had identified himself only as Mr. Smith. "As I stated before, it was a chemical weapons production facility. The equipment was sophisticated, the security was professional, and the personnel were not local insurgents." "How can you be certain they were not insurgents?" Cross felt her patience wearing thin. "Because I've been fighting insurgents for 12 years, and these men were professional soldiers. They moved with discipline, they used advanced equipment, and they coordinated their attacks with precision." "But you have no direct evidence of their nationality or affiliation." "No direct evidence, but their tactics and equipment suggested they were either Russian or Chinese special forces. The men exchanged glances, and Cross realized that they already knew the answers to the questions they were asking. This wasn't a debriefing, it was a damage assessment. Captain, in your opinion, was the facility you discovered a threat to American interests? Yes, absolutely. Chemical weapons in the hands of hostile forces represent a clear and present danger to American forces and allies in the region. And in your opinion, was the action taken by Lieutenant Commander Thorne appropriate? Cross felt a chill run down her spine. They were looking for someone to blame, and Vesper Thorne was the obvious target. She had disobeyed orders, engaged enemy forces without authorization, and exposed a classified operation. Lieutenant Commander Thorne saved the lives of my team and eliminated a significant threat to national security. Her actions were not only appropriate, they were heroic. Captain, please limit your responses to factual observations. That is a factual observation. Blackbird saved our lives. The debriefing continued for another hour, with the same questions asked in different ways. By the end, Cross was certain that the official report would paint a very different picture of the night's events than the reality she had experienced. But she also knew that the truth had a way of coming out, regardless of official reports. Lieutenant Commander Vesper Thorne stood at attention in front of General Morrison's desk, her injured arm in a sling and her ribs wrapped in bandages. The general's office was austere, decorated only with military awards and photographs of aircraft. But the man behind the desk was anything but austere. "Blackbird, you've put me in a very difficult position," Morrison said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Sir, I followed the rules of engagement. I provided close air support to friendly forces under fire. You also disobeyed direct orders from your commanding officer and engaged enemy forces without authorization." Vesper had expected this conversation, but it still stung. "Sir, American soldiers were dying. I had the ability to help them, and I did. You also exposed a classified operation that took years to develop." The words hit Vesper like a physical blow. A classified operation. The chemical weapons facility hadn't been a discovery, it had been a target, and she had walked into the middle of it. "Sir, are you telling me that the United States government was aware of the facility?" "I'm telling you that there are aspects of this operation that are beyond your need to know." "Sir, with respect, I think I have a right to know. I nearly died last night, and 12 soldiers risked their lives to save me." Morrison's expression softened slightly. "Vesper, you're a good pilot, one of the best I've ever seen, but you're also naive. The world is more complicated than you think." "Sir, I'm not naive. I'm a professional soldier who was sent on a mission without adequate intelligence or support." "You were sent on a mission to provide close air support to a special forces team that was conducting a classified operation. The fact that you succeeded doesn't change the fact that you violated direct orders." Vesper felt the anger building in her chest. "Sir, if this was a classified operation, why wasn't I briefed? Why were the mission parameters so vague? Why did my radio communications go dead?" "Because the operation was compartmentalized. You were given only the information you needed to complete your part of the mission." "And what was my part of the mission, sir?" Morrison was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. "Your part was to provide close air support to a special forces team that was investigating a chemical weapons facility. Nothing more, nothing less." "Then why did I receive orders to abort the mission?" "Because the situation changed. The facility was more heavily defended than we expected, and the risk to American lives was too great." Vesper felt the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. "Sir, you're telling me that the United States government knew about the chemical weapons facility and sent a special forces team to investigate it?" "I'm telling you that there are some things you're better off not knowing." Sir, with respect, I think I have a right to know, especially if I'm going to be court-martialed for my actions. Morrison's expression hardened. Who said anything about a court-martial? Sir, I disobeyed direct orders and engaged enemy forces without authorization. Under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, that's grounds for a court-martial. Vesper, you're not going to be court-martialed. You're going to be transferred. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. A transfer meant the end of her career as a combat pilot, the end of everything she had worked for. Sir, transferred where? To a desk job at the Pentagon. You'll be working in the intelligence division, analyzing satellite imagery and writing reports. Sir, I'm a pilot, not an analyst. You were a pilot, now you're an intelligence officer. Vesper felt the world spinning around her. 12 hours ago, she had been a combat pilot flying dangerous missions in hostile territory. Now she was being exiled to a desk job because she had done what any professional soldier would have done. Sir, is this punishment for saving the lives of American soldiers? This is not punishment. This is career management. You've become a liability, and liabilities need to be managed. Sir, I've served my country faithfully for 8 years. I've flown over 200 combat missions, and I've never failed to complete an assigned task. And now you're going to serve your country in a different capacity. Vesper stood at attention, her mind racing through her options. She could refuse the transfer and face a court-martial, but that would end her career anyway. She could accept the transfer and spend the rest of her military service behind a desk, analyzing photographs and writing reports that no one would read. Or she could find another way to serve her country. Sir, I respectfully request permission to retire from active duty. Morrison's eyebrows rose. Vesper, you're 32 years old. You have at least 10 more years of service ahead of you. Sir, I became a pilot to serve my country in combat. If I can't do that, then I'd rather serve in another capacity. What other capacity? I don't know yet, sir, but I'll find something. Morrison studied her for a long moment. Vesper, you're making a mistake. The Pentagon assignment is temporary. In a year or two, when this all blows over, you could be back in the cockpit. Sir, with respect, I don't think this is going to blow over. I think this is just the beginning. The beginning of what? The beginning of the truth coming out. Morrison's expression turned cold. Vesper, I'm going to give you some advice. Forget about the truth. Forget about the mission. Forget about the facility. Take the transfer, do your job, and keep your mouth shut. Sir, I can't do that. Then you're a fool. Vesper remained at attention, her injured arm throbbing and her ribs aching. But her mind was clear, clearer than it had been in years. She knew what she had to do. Sir, I respectfully request permission to retire from active duty. Morrison sighed. Request granted. You'll be processed out within 30 days. Thank you, sir. As Vesper turned to leave, Morrison called after her. Vesper, whatever you're thinking of doing, don't. The people involved in this operation have resources and connections that you can't imagine. They will destroy you. Sir, they already have. 6 months later, Vesper Thorne sat in a small coffee shop in Washington, D.C., across from a journalist who had been investigating military contractors and their connections to overseas operations. The man's name was David Chen, and he had been asking the same questions that had been bothering her since that night in Afghanistan. Ms. Thorne, you're telling me that the United States government knew about the chemical weapons facility and sent a special forces team to investigate it. I'm telling you that the mission parameters were inconsistent with a routine patrol, and that the facility was too sophisticated to be a simple terrorist operation. But you have no direct evidence of government involvement. I have 12 soldiers who will testify that they were sent to investigate a facility that officially didn't exist. Chen made notes on his tablet, and you're willing to go on the record with this information. I'm willing to tell the truth. Ms. Thorne, you understand that this story will destroy your reputation and possibly put you in danger. Mr. Chen, my reputation was destroyed 6 months ago when I was forced to retire from the Air Force. As for danger, I've been in danger before. But this is different. You're talking about exposing a covert operation that involves some very powerful people. I'm talking about exposing a conspiracy that cost the lives of American soldiers and nearly started a war. Chen studied her face. Ms. Thorne, why are you doing this? Because 13 soldiers went into that valley and 13 soldiers came out. We made a promise to each other that night, and I intend to keep it. What promise? That we would tell the truth, regardless of the consequences. Chen nodded slowly. Ms. Thorne, I'll need to verify your story with other sources. Can you put me in touch with any of the Special Forces soldiers who were with you? I can put you in touch with Captain Cross. She's retired now, but she's willing to talk. And the others? Some of them are still on active duty. They'll have to make their own decisions about whether to speak publicly. Chen closed his tablet. Ms. Thorne, this is going to be a long and difficult process. Are you prepared for that? Mr. Chen, I've been preparing for this for 6 months. Then let's get started. The story broke 3 weeks later on the front page of the Washington Post. The headline read, "Secret Chemical Weapons Facility Exposed by U.S. Forces." The article detailed the discovery of a sophisticated chemical weapons production facility in Afghanistan, the battle to destroy it, and the subsequent cover-up by government officials. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Congressional hearings were announced, military officials were called to testify, and the media went into overdrive trying to uncover additional details. The story dominated the news cycle for weeks, with new revelations emerging daily. But the most significant reaction came from the 13 soldiers who had been involved in the operation. One by one, they came forward to confirm the details of the story, despite the potential consequences to their careers and personal safety. Captain Miranda Cross, now retired from the Army, testified before Congress about the events of that night. Staff Sergeant Rico Delgado, still on active duty, confirmed the details of the firefight and the rescue operation. Lieutenant Sarah Kim, now a captain, described the chemical weapons equipment they had discovered. Each testimony added weight to the story, making it impossible for government officials to dismiss it as the ramblings of a disgruntled former pilot. The truth was coming out, and it was more complex and disturbing than anyone had imagined. The investigation that followed revealed a web of connections between military contractors, intelligence agencies, and foreign governments. The chemical weapons facility had been a joint operation between Russian intelligence and a consortium of American defense contractors, designed to produce weapons that could be used in proxy wars without direct attribution. The operation had been kept secret from most government officials, including the President and the Secretary of Defense. A small group of intelligence officials and military contractors had been running their own foreign policy, using American soldiers as unwitting pawns in their games. The revelation sent shockwaves through the government and the military. Several high-ranking officials resigned, and multiple investigations were launched. The story became a symbol of the dangers of unaccountable power and the importance of transparency in government operations. But for Vesper Thorne, the most important outcome was the recognition that 13 soldiers had done their duty, regardless of the personal cost. They had discovered a threat to national security, fought against overwhelming odds, and brought each other home alive. And when the truth was threatened, they had stood up and spoken out. The medal ceremony was held at the Pentagon, in a room filled with military officials, members of Congress, and journalists. The 13 soldiers who had been involved in the operation were awarded the Silver Star for their actions that night, recognizing their courage and dedication to duty. Vesper Thorne stood at attention as the medal was pinned to her chest, her injured arm finally healed but her memories of that night still vivid. The medal was heavy, its weight a reminder of the sacrifices that had been made and the price that had been paid for the truth. "Lieutenant Commander Thorne," the general said, "your actions that night exemplified the highest traditions of the United States Air Force. You risked your life to save your fellow soldiers, and you stood up for the truth when it would have been easier to remain silent." "Sir, I was just doing my job." "No, you were doing much more than that. You were upholding the oath you swore to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic." The ceremony was brief but meaningful. Each soldier was recognized for their individual contributions to the mission, but the emphasis was on the collective achievement of the team. They had succeeded not because of individual heroism, but because they had worked together, trusted each other, and refused to abandon their comrades. After the ceremony, Vesper found herself surrounded